So let's move without further ado onto the session. So Dan Akidil. Dan has spent over 8 years as an English language teacher. He's taught in Germany, Turkey, and the UK. And throughout this time, he's regularly taught online courses, which makes him an ideal person to deliver this session. Nowadays, he's a commissioning editor of exams courses at Cambridge University Press, and this follows 5 years working in ELT publishing. And some of the courses he's worked on, I'm sure you've heard of: Mindset for IELTS, Complete, and Open World. So without further ado, welcome Dan, and I hope everybody enjoys the session.
Thank you very much, Jo. And a big hello to everyone. It's so great to see so many people here. I was having a look at the chat box just before the webinar started, and it's from so many countries from all over the world. It's absolutely brilliant. I think I saw a comment on there saying it was 37 degrees in the south of Brazil. Very envious of that, from about an 8 degrees weather here in just north of Cambridge. So thank you ever so much for coming along to my session today. And today I will be talking about and giving you instant ideas for developing exam skills online, offline, and somewhere in between. And in today's presentation, I'd like to share with you some lesson activities that I've been developing that take advantage of online content and digital tools that help to develop students' receptive and productive skills, which hopefully you can take away and use with your students. I want to make this as interactive as possible, so I'll be demoing live some of the ideas and asking you at various points throughout the presentation to provide answers to questions and inviting suggestions for other ways that you can use the tools that will be featured. So please do write these in the chat box on Zoom or comments on Facebook. There'll also be time, as Jo says, at the end for you to ask any questions that you may have. So please add any questions to the Q&A box on Zoom and Facebook, and we'll try to answer as many of these as we can. So without further ado, let's dive into our first activity. So the first activity is called Shop and Rate, and it uses online product reviews. I think one of the main benefits of using online reviews with our students is that they're incredibly rich in language. They're filled with wonderful words, phrases, and expressions that really help to expand our learners' vocabulary. So how can we use online reviews as a learning tool with our students? Well, one really effective way that I've found to use them is to start off by taking a screenshot of a review from a website and importantly, removing the name of the product and the rating that the reviewer has given it. The students will then be given 2 questions to think about, and I put an example review here on the slide that you can see. And the 2 questions that we would ask our students: the first one is, what product is being reviewed and why? And the second is, what rating do you think the writer gave the product and why? So let's just quickly think about then the purpose of these questions and why we're asking them. So by asking our students to work out the product, they're looking for specific information, i.e. the keywords and phrases that give them clues to identifying the type of product that's being reviewed. And with that as well, they'll encounter words and phrases that are possibly unknown. So there's a chance to develop their skill of working out the meaning from the context. And with the second question, asking students to work out the rating, they move beyond the word and phrase level and start to analyze the text as a whole, identifying the reviewer's tone, their attitude, their opinion, and also they get to look at how balanced the review is. For example, is it mainly positive? Is it mainly negative? And also then what we also go into, and I think what is a really nice part of this activity, is that it challenges students to recognize more nuanced language. So for example, how strong things like the opinion phrases are and how strong the adjectives are. And by asking the why for these 2 questions, we're getting our students to use the text as a justification for their answers. So to see how this works in practice, and I can see already in the chat box a couple of answers, I think you might know what I'm going to be asking. I'm now going to ask you to read the review on screen and to answer the 2 questions in the chat box. I'd like you to write which product you think is being reviewed and which rating from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, you think it was given. Post your ideas in the chat box. I'll just take a look and we'll see what you've got. Okay, some answers already coming in, which is great. We've got speakers, Bluetooth speakers, a guitar, very nice, MP3 player, Bluetooth headphones, that's great, an iPod, earphones, speakers, again, ratings are coming in as well. We've got 5 stars mainly that we're looking at, a 4-star there. It's great. Thank you ever so much, guys. This is brilliant. The chat box is really moving. It's great to see. Again, we've got a guitar, headphones, so something related to music. That's really good. And 5 stars as well seems to be the running theme. So let's check and find out if you were correct. So the product was portable Bluetooth speaker. So very well done if you said speakers, and particularly well done if you said Bluetooth as well. That's really, really impressive, and very nicely done if you said portable. There are a couple of clues in that review there that suggested it might be portable. So it's really good to see that coming through. And the star rating it got, as the majority of you guessed correctly, it is a 5-star rating. And if we take a look at this review and we unpack what you were doing and in essence what your students would be doing, again, the clues in the first question, what product was being reviewed, came through those kind of topic related words, things like tone, sound, crackle, hum, volume, audio, orchestra, were all giving you the idea that it was something related to music. And then with the second question, what rating did the writer give? Well, we see some really positive adjectives and phrases in this review. You know, absolutely brilliant, extremely good and lifelike, like sitting in front of an orchestra, some really positive phrases. So I hope you can see how enjoyable that activity is and how engaging I think that activity is, and the benefits that it certainly brings to our students. Of course, as we've said, you know, challenging them to deduce meaning from context, identifying specific information, analyzing language, understanding main ideas, you know, all of these skills that they're using that are really important, for example, for exams, but also elsewhere, you know, that they're doing whilst taking part in this activity. And I think the other benefit of this activity as well is that it is really flexible. Now, I've given you an example here of a product review. But let's say, for example, you've just done a lesson on travel or tourism or holidays. You can equally use the same activity approach, but instead of using a product review, you can go to somewhere like TripAdvisor, for example. It's got the same idea. It's got a title at the top. It's got a star rating, and just copying and pasting or taking a snapshot of that review and presenting it to your students. It works, I think, really, really nicely. So I'm going to give you a few ideas of how we can extend this. We've mainly focused there on just some of the receptive skills that we're developing. So let's have a look at how else we can use this activity as well. So one idea, and I think this works really, really nicely, particularly when we're looking at students and asking students to analyze the balance and the kind of positive, negative balance of the review, is to start adding in 2, 3, 4-star reviews. Now, I've put an example of, well, I won't say just yet, see if you can work it out, of a review that is either 2, 3, or 4. And what you'll notice in these reviews is like I said, it gets students to start thinking about, okay, so there is positive, there are some negatives, but how balanced is that? How positive are the adjectives? How positive are the phrases? When do they introduce a negative about, you know, a negative side of the product or the location? Is that at the end? Is it softened in any way? So if you've guessed it already, and I can see on the chat box, that's great, people guessing, it is 4. Yes, it is. Well done if you did say 4. And I think that this is a really, for a 4-star review, you can see, I think you can see just the softening of the language in the negative. You know, my only gripe is that they're not quite big enough. So you can start to see. And as teachers, what we do is we would choose reviews that do this, that bring out this really lovely language, not necessarily give the product away, but are also filled with language that we'd ideally and would love for our students to reproduce productively. So that's a really nice part of this, I think, as well, this activity. So yeah, there are some other ideas as well. So we've turned this into a, we've looked at the receptive side of this. What about the productive? So what about getting students to actually write something themselves? So one way that we can do that is to ask students to write their own review using some of the language that they've seen in the text. So you could say, for example, take the portable speakers, or take a product that they've bought recently or a place they've been recently, and ask them to write their own review and give it a star rating. That's quite a generic, quite a general writing activity that they can do. And again, just kind of start recycling some of the language that they've seen, particularly if you're basing it on the same theme as the reviews that they've seen in the receptive side of this activity. Another really interesting one, and I find this really works well with students, is to give students a rating of a product, and they write the review based on that rating. And this allows you as the teachers to kind of create or to have a bit more control over the writing. So if you want to focus on more negative side and more negative language or things like that, then possibly a 1-2 star review. Or if you do want to focus more on the positive side, 4 or 5, or if you really want to work on kind of balanced writing and making sure you've got an even spread, then a 3-star rating as well would work. So it's a really nice feature, I think, and a really nice extension activity for the products. And of course, I think it's already quite engaging, it's quite dynamic already, but if you did want to make it even more fun, then you could start to introduce products and places and locations that perhaps are a little bit more unusual. I put 3 on the slide here that you can see. And I think when you start to introduce more unknown products or more unusual products, you start to get some really interesting reviews written by students and some really creative reviews as well. So that's just another way that you can, another idea rather that you can use to make this activity just a little bit more dynamic as well. And like I said, I think if doing this in class, I think what's nice is to give them maybe 5 or 6 reviews to make the task a bit more substantial, and then choosing one of those as your productive task. So it's a nice idea and a nice way, as I said, to exploit online reviews with your students. So let's move on to the second activity. Now, the second activity is a piece of software that I've used with students, and I find it really interesting. I think it brings out, or what it does rather, is it's focused on reading, and it makes reading texts a little bit more dynamic and more engaging. And it's a nice one to bring into a reading lesson, just to kind of change the style of your lessons as well. Now, it's a piece of software called Spreeder, and it's a speed reading software. And so to demonstrate this, I'm now going to show you in real time how this works. So if we bring it up onto the screen here, it's a free app. So going into Google, typing in Spreeder, if you click on free app here, this will bring up a box into which you can paste a piece of text. And what I've done in the past with students is I've often taken a paragraph of text and chosen a question that corresponds with that, as the introduction paragraph of a text, or a text from a news website or an article or blog or something like that. And once you've pasted your text into here, you'll click on Spreed down at the bottom. And what this will do is it will play each word individually as a way of reading. And it's got some really nice features as well that I think that work really nicely and allow you just to tailor the activity a little bit more. If you come down to settings down here, so you can see that the pace of this is okay, I think. But if you do want to make it faster or slower, well, to do that, you come down into the words per minute section. If you want to make it faster, you simply increase it. If you want to make it slower, you simply decrease it. So I think it's a really nice tool. And again, the benefit of speed reading, I think, is that it certainly changes the way that students read naturally, but it also not only how quickly they read, but I think it also, I've noticed it really improves students' concentration as well and engagement in the reading activity. So it's a really nice tool. And again, there's a few other options on there. So you can increase the window size, you can increase the font size, you change the color, etc., and tailor it to how you prefer it to look with your students. So again, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to get you involved in this. So what I'm going to do is present 2 questions and how I might use this with my students. So I'm going to give you 2 questions to answer. Then you're going to watch the Spreeder, and I'd like you again to type your answers into the chat box. So we've got question 1. What is the text genre? So is it an article? Is it a review? Is it an email? What kind of text is it? And the second question, something a bit more specific, who is Stephen Barnes? Okay, so 2 2 questions for you to answer. I'm now going to load up. So this is what it will look like when you clicked on Spreed. Okay, I'm going to play it twice to give you an idea, to give you a chance to check your answers in the second turn. So starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see. So if you want to start to write your answers into the chat box, I can see them coming in. That's brilliant. Again, thank you ever so much, guys. This is fantastic to see. So many answers coming in. I'm going to play it one more time just so you can check your answers and give you a chance to write your answers as well into the chat box. All right, so let's go over to the chat box and see some of the answers coming in. Well, they're coming in thick and fast. This is fantastic. So we've got job advert, job advert, job ad. Job ad for the first question. So what is the tech genre? It looks like the majority are saying job advertisement. Letter of application we've also got in there. And also the second question then, who is Stephen Barnes? We've got answers of camp organizer, camp organizer, camp organizer. I think you've got it. You're too good. That is absolutely fantastic. Yes, so to give you the answers to that question, those 2 questions, the first one, the genre of the text, or the style of the text, it was a job advert. And the second question, Stephen Barnes, is the camp organizer. So very, very nicely done there. And it would be great as well as we're going through just to see if you've got any more ideas of how you might use this piece of software. This is just one example. Again, like I said, so please do write them in the chat box and we'll pick them up. Because I think, like I said, if you've got a reading text and you've got a paragraph, and typically with a lot of reading text, particularly those you find in course books, you will see a question that's tagged to each of those paragraphs. So you can just drop one of those paragraphs into this speed reader and give them the question and ask students to do it that way. And again, it's just, I find anyway, a really nice way to make the reading a little bit more dynamic. So yeah, brilliant. So literature classes, great. So I'm sorry, just some ideas coming in, which is fantastic. Yeah, literature classes as well, which is great. That's really nice to see. Find certain words or words that correspond to some idea. Yeah, really nice. So actually getting the more specific information and developing that skill, that's really nice. So this is really a teleprompter. Wow, brilliant. What a great idea in the chat box there. Fantastic. Yeah, reviewing sentence construction games. Lovely. So again, perhaps you're putting a sentence in a grammar sentence, it might contain a mistake. Students need to identify what the mistake is, or construct their own sentences and put them into the speed reader. So that's a really nice interview questions. Brilliant. So some really lovely ideas there, and thank you ever so much for providing those. I think this is what's great about these sessions, is that we can have this kind of interactivity sharing of ideas as well. So that's absolutely fantastic. Great. So we now move on to the next activity, and this one is what I've called, well, block out bars. This is, and again, it's a similar, or it's based on a reading text, and this is again another activity that I found that works really well with students, particularly when you want to engage your students. And I think now of virtual classrooms, when it's a little bit harder to know if students are paying attention, if they're really focusing on you, it's another way, particularly with a reading text, to kind of keep students engaged and also to promote language learning as well. So so let's have a look at how this activity works. It's relatively straightforward in its setup. So it's called block out bars, and it works by taking a reading text and hiding or blocking out certain words, phrases, or sentences. It helps the students to develop their skills, for example, identifying meaning from context, working out the types of words that they need to complete a sentence, and also for you, the teacher, as well. To really to focus on any particular language or grammar point that's covered in the class. So it's a really nice it's a really nice activity to develop that. And how you would set it up, so if you're using a PDF, you can hide the words, phrases, or sentences using the shapes tool on the PDF. And if you're using a document such as Word, then you can either do the same thing, use the shapes tool to hide it, or change the color of the words that you want to hide to white in the document as well. And again, I think that what's really nice about this activity is that it's really flexible. So you can use it with any reading text, and it allows you as teachers as well, I think, to select any words that you want to hide and focus on if you're working on a particular grammar point or vocab point, topic related vocabulary, for example. And it can be turned into, and also as well, it can be turned into a game, which is I think what makes this activity even better. And adds engagement. So you can set the scoring system up, for example. So you can see on the slide here, there are 3 words that are covered up. And you can allocate a point system here. So you can have 3 points are awarded if the student guesses the word exactly or the phrase exactly. 2 points are awarded to the student who guess a different word, but it's to the one that's hidden, but it still works, it still fits within the sentence. And 1 point to students who guess the word, but in an incorrect form. So it might be if it's a grammatical point you've used, they've got the right, say, verb, for example, but it hasn't been conjugated correctly, something like that. So I think you can probably guess again what I'm going to ask you to do. So in the chat box now, I'd like you to guess the 3 words that you think are hidden behind the green bars in this text. And again, put your answers into the chat box. We'll pick those up and we'll see how you get on. So we've got some answers coming in already. This is great to see. And again, yeah, I think you're too good. This is fantastic. Really, really great. I think about number 2, actually. I think it seems to be the majority of number 1 and number 3. We've got the answers to, but let's see for number 2 particularly. So we're getting some answers in for number 2, which is great. Now we've got, actually, it's quite interesting. We've got a common word coming up in number 2, but it's in different forms. So this is really quite interesting. So let's take a look then. Let's have a look at the answers that we've got. And the first one, as the majority have guessed correctly, is 2. The second one, the one that had a few variants of the answer, let's have a look. It is worthwhile, not as the word that was hidden. And finally, the last word is given the fact. So the word is fact that was hidden. So I hope you find that activity useful, and I hope you can see how it works and also how flexible it is as well. And again, if we're thinking about the skills that we're developing, again, working out meanings of words through the context, or working out the types of words, these are all important skills, particularly exam skills, but also again, elsewhere as well. So that's one activity, again, that you can use with your students. Okay, so let's move on to the next activity. And this one is called What's My Question? And this, sorry, I noticed in the chat box, someone said worthwhile activity. Very nice, nicely put, brilliant. So for this next activity, it's a really nice listening activity that works by asking your students to record their answers to a question. So it starts by giving each student one question and making sure that each student receives a different question. And again, particularly if you're teaching an exams class, the question that you might like to give your students is one that they might encounter in the speaking paper. So this works quite nicely for exams classes as well. We then ask our students to record their answers on their phones or computers. They mustn't repeat the question, though, note, they must only provide the answer. And if doing this as homework, you perhaps might like to ask your students to send you the MP3s or the recording. And if doing this in a live class, allowing your students time to record their answers and then invite each student to play the recording. So in the lesson then, you would play each recording and ask the other students to guess what the question is that's being answered. This can be done, again, if you're in an online class, in a chat box, or in a traditional classroom for the students to write their answers down. And there are 2 ways that you can do this activity, and 2 nice ways that are kind of, I suppose, an easier way and a more challenging way. The way that you can make it easier is to give students a list of, say, 3 or 4 questions to choose from. And then they just circle the question they think is being answered. Or if you want to challenge your students a bit more and you feel that they could do this, you leave it open. So you simply play the recording and just ask the students to write down the question that they think is being answered. Now, as this is interactive, I do have two examples here, and ones we're going to test it because I'd like you to see how this would work in practice. And we're going to do this as a live demonstration now. So the first, I'm going to play you two recordings. The first recording is an answer, and I've given you 3 options to choose from. The second recording is open. So again, I'd like you just to write down what you think the question is that's being answered. So here we go with question number 1. We've got 3 options to choose from. Let's see.
Yes, I do. I travel abroad a lot, and having all my favorite tracks with me on the go is a lifesaver. The only issue I have is that I'm always running out of storage space, so I can't store all of my albums on my phone.
Okay, so you can see how this works. I'm only going to play it once, but you can listen back and a bit later on the re-recording on YouTube, so you can have another listen to it a bit later. We've got some answers coming in. Majority A, we've got a nice mix. A, B, and C have been said. The correct answer is A. Do you listen to music on your mobile phone? That was the correct answer to the first recording. Again, you can see how it works. That was just the answer provided. We didn't know what the question was, so it's just a way of so just providing the answer. So here comes the second recording. This one is open. So I'd like you now to type the question now into the chat box that you think is being answered. Oh.
I'm not sure I could, to be honest. I'm so reliant on my mobile phone, whether it's keeping in touch with my friends or using the latest apps to help me with learning French, that I can't really imagine my life without it.
Okay, some very fast typers amongst you. This is fantastic. We've got some questions coming in, which is really nice. Could you live without your mobile phone? Could you live without your mobile phone? Can you live without your mobile phone? Could you live without your mobile phone? They're all saying the same thing. Again, you've got it. Well done. That is the correct answer. Could you live without your mobile phone? So very nicely done. And hopefully that shows you how you can use this activity with your students as well. And I think if we think about the benefits of this and why this is I think a really nice activity to do with our students. So the idea is that you're playing each recording to a group of students. And so they've got instantly, the student who's provided the answer can see from the other students, it's almost like a peer-to-peer review. They can see how well they've been understood, how accurately they've spoken or how accurately they've answered the questions by seeing if the students can guess what the question is. And if obviously the majority or all of the students can get it, then that's, I think, also going to really improve their confidence as well. This is the other thing it does, I think, quite nicely. It just allows them to check to see how accurate their English is, but also a confidence building exercise as well. And I think the other thing, and again, particularly focusing kind of on exams here, is it allows you, because you're recording it or because the students are recording it, what that will do is bring up a timestamp so the students can see how long they've spent answering the question. And that's particularly, I think, important to give students a better understanding of timings, where timings, of course, in the speaking papers of exams are really important. And it will help your students to get a better awareness of how long it's taking them to answer, how much they're saying within that time. And if they're kind of over talking, going over the allocated time, so if they've only got a minute in the exam or 2 minutes in the exam, if they're going over that, the recording will show it. If they're obviously going under that as well, they'll be able to see. And so it almost raises awareness, and it helps students to practice how long it takes them to answer the question. So that's, I hope you find that interesting, and I hope you can find a way to use that with your students as well. And as you can see, it's fairly flexible. So you can do it in a live class, you can do it as homework where the students send in their MP3s. And if you've got students perhaps who are quite nervous, who don't want to kind of have their voice played in front of the rest of the class, you can set it up as a homework activity as well and send the files to the students so they can do it on their own. So there's kind of not that pressure if students are a little bit more uncomfortable with sharing their or playing their own recordings. But yeah, a really nice activity, and again, I think one that kind of helps students with their classes. So I've got just one more. I know we've got questions coming up, so just one more activity to show you. And this is a piece of software that I used. And the moment I used it, I thought, wow, this is something that we can really use with our students. And it's using and taking advantage of speech-to-text software. And I think one of the really nice things about this is that we see speech-to-text software and speech recognition software used in a lot of walks of life, be it through kind of our TVs, on our phones. And why not take advantage of it as a potential learning tool? So I'm going to show you one way that I would use this, one quite straightforward, quite simple way that I would use this with students. And it uses Google Docs. So this is a plain Google Doc. And one of the benefits of using Google Doc is that everyone can access it at the same time. So it's quite interactive as a platform. Now, to access the speech-to-text software, if we come on to Tools, and if we come down to Voice Typing, this will bring up a microphone. And if you click the microphone, it will record everything that you're saying. Now, obviously I click the microphone, place the microphone. So what that does is that gives students a chance to show their, or to see their language reproduced in real time. And I think one of the benefits of doing that is that it really helps to improve student confidence. And I think that's a really important focus here, particularly when it comes to speaking activities, is that students will speak into the microphone and they can see and get feedback instantly on how well they're being, or how well they're how accurately they're talking and they're speaking. And then again, we can use that as a tool for error correction, so they can highlight where the words were coming in that they couldn't quite understand, or the speech recognition software couldn't pick up. And also it allows you as a teacher just to kind of mark and say, okay, this is words to work on, and then they can just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until they've got it accurately. So just to finish off then with one way that you can use speech to text software with your students, and that is, and one way I've used this is to give students a paragraph of text from a reading text or a listening transcript. Students then read out the text into the speech software, and then students then have a side-by-side comparison. They can check the speech recognition document or the Google Doc versus the transcript or the reading text that they've read from, and then they can start to see where the perhaps inaccuracies are, or where they kind of haven't been understood, and there they can focus on, again, reread it and work on it to improve. And again, it's one that students can do in their own time as well. So it's something that you can do in class as homework, or you can encourage students to do in their own time by giving them a text and then supplying the Google Doc, sending that Google Doc to you so you can then check where the how they've got on. So hopefully a nice flexibility there with the lesson. So those are the activities that I wanted to present. So thank you very much again for your input and your engagement into the chat box. That was really, really useful to see. So I'm going to finish off just by sharing with you a couple of websites that I hope you would find useful. They're really, really good for extra resources. So we start off with the World of Better Learning blog, which it's filled with articles, blogs, resources, ideas for language teachers and students. It's a really, really rich site. So I hope you go and have a look at that. It's really, really useful. And the second one is Cambridge Together, and I've put the website there as well. And this offers a wide variety of materials to support teachers, learners, and institutions as well. So thank you ever so much. It's been a pleasure to be talking to you today, and I think we now have time for questions.
Thank you, Dan. That was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. Made me want to go back and start teaching. We've had a lot of questions. I'm not going to have a chance to ask all of them, but there's some quite specific ones which I think might be useful to answer. Mm-hmm. And there's a question from Kata asking what level or what exam you would use that first activity for, so that matching the reviews.
Yeah, I'll just load up the activity or the slide, sorry, so we can have a look at it. So the first one are the reviews, yes. So yeah, this is certainly, I would probably say it can be used, you can be quite flexible, of course, because you can choose reviews where the language is relatively low level. You can then choose language that's relatively high level. I mean, I did think when I was writing this, I did this activity, it was aimed at B2, C1 students. And I think that was just due to the sophistication of the language that were in the reviews that I was picking out. And typically when we think about students in an exam task, you know, sometimes they're asked to write reviews at higher levels, and so they can pick these words out. But I wouldn't necessarily rule out lower levels at all. In fact, quite the opposite. I think, again, it can be quite flexible. You can then tailor it to lower levels, again, just finding reviews that help you to, or that feature language that's relatively low level that you think your students could deal with.
Oh, definitely. And a couple of questions on the Spreeder app.
Yes.
People asking to remind what it is again, but just another reminder that these slides with the talk will be available for you to watch at your leisure if you missed anything, or you need to go and hear it again. But it's speed with an R in the middle, Spreeder.
Yeah, hopefully if you can see the slide on screen, I did put the URL at the top.
Brilliant.
Just up here.
Thank
If
you
you
very
do Google
much.
Spreeder, they do have the free app. That's the one I showed you today, and you can click
And there
on
was
that.
a question, sorry, Danny, if that would work for other languages, or that only works for English?
No, it will work for other languages. That's a good question, actually. So essentially, it will just reproduce what's been pasted into this box here. So whatever the text that you've put in, it will read it. I think it's probably worth exploring. It's a good point. I have only used it in English, but it probably is worth just experimenting to see if other languages are supported. I would imagine so. But yeah, certainly probably best to go and check and see before using the students.
There's quite a few questions from Fafi, but I'm just going to look at this one where she asks how we can assess progress of students online, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, assess students' progress online. That is a really good question, and I think it's one that we've encountered, haven't we, since the pandemic, when a lot of classes have moved to online. I think the way that we can assess, I think essentially, if we're looking at activity-based assessments, I think things like, as we've seen the activities today, like block-out bars, something like that, where you want to, for example, you've taught a lesson and you focused on a particular grammar point, and you can then, as homework, go out and block out words in that text where you're seeing of the language that you've just practiced, so you can see if they are applying the language and they're using what they've been taught in the lesson to work out what those words are. I think that's one way of doing it through activities, and of course, and naturally, it's engagement with your students as well. I find asking students to obviously to take the time to produce and speak into recorded microphones, produce written work and things like that you can then go on to and assess, I think, are other ways of doing it.
There's a few questions around age as well. There's a good question from Anjay asking about your experience with I can't say the word, teaching online with teenagers, doing exam practice with teenagers, and that you would recommend or avoid.
And what, sorry, I would recommend and avoid?
What activities, if you're
okay, yeah, certainly. So this is a really good question. Actually, I would say probably 80% of the students that I was teaching online for the 6 years that I did it were students that A, wanted to improve their speaking skills, and B, were preparing for an exam. And I think when it comes to online teaching and when it comes to using these kinds of activities, and I remember my very first online lesson, and I remember kind of throwing myself in at the deep end because I was completely new to the software and didn't really know how any of it worked. I think the first thing is to start off really quite small. So start off with an audio and just an audio, two-way audio video, for example. And then I think in terms of the activities that you're using, I found when I was teaching, I could certainly follow a course book, or I could follow lesson plans online, sending the lesson worksheets to the students before each lesson. And I think the activities that you'll find when you're teaching online, you can then start, you're exposed to much more and a lot more material, a wealth of material when you start to introduce shared screen and things like that. I think the things to avoid, it's quite interesting because I found that I could replicate a lot of what I was doing in the traditional classroom online. I can't think of anything that I would necessarily avoid that I would also avoid in the traditional classroom. I think what I avoided at the start was things that I didn't feel comfortable using. So that was very much, shared screen software, playing audio through screens and getting students to share their screens and things like that until I got the confidence to do it. So I would say start small and use the experience from your traditional classroom, what you would avoid, what works well. Typically, I've found those do tend to work quite well in online, if you can't adapt them slightly to the online environment.
And what if students are not learning at the same time? Does that present any challenges?
Of course, yeah. No, I think it does. I think if students, so if we're talking then about some students being in the class, some absent, and some students logging in and some not, I think this is probably where I would perhaps consider, if you do have this option, I would start to think about a flipped classroom approach. So a flipped classroom approach is essentially what we're asking our students to do is a lot of the work at home homework or in their own time, and then using the kind of the live online lesson or the class lesson as a platform for students to check their answers, to ask any questions that they've got, and then keeping a record of that. That's why things like Google Docs are really good, because it's a shared document that students can, if they do miss the lesson, they can log in and they can see what's been covered or what questions have been raised in that lesson that they might have missed. So I think if you do have some students there, some students not, I think just thinking about what you're doing in the lesson, using it then as a platform for communicative activities, productive skills practice, things like that, checking answers and so on. And then in that way, I suppose you're starting to, it's a shame if they're missing it, but you are starting to minimize too much, or students missing out on too much if they weren't there, and keeping a log of what you're doing in the lesson, thinking about using shared docs and that they can go in and dip in and out of, is certainly one way of doing that.
There's just one more question, which I thought was interesting, from Carla, saying that we have a lot of test preparation programs on the Cambridge Learning Management System, but they're quite boring and not engaging. So do we have any plans to develop interactive course to develop the skills required for Cambridge exams?
Oh, wow. Okay, great question. So yes, we certainly do. We're at Cambridge, we're always developing, we're always looking to see how we can kind of develop our digital offering. So yes, we certainly have things upcoming that are, I think, are really, really exciting. So do keep an eye out for that. I'm sorry, I don't know how much I can say about them, so I don't want to give too much away, but certainly we do have things up in the, certainly in development at the moment.
Definitely. And also I think if you look at our teachers' books, there's often a lot more activities to help you develop and, use some of the materials in the students' book.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. And finally, what do you think is a way of helping to really engage students online?
Yeah, very good question. I know that this is something that can be a big struggle, I think, with online and virtual classrooms, because of course the temptation is to perhaps move away from their screen or look at something else that they've got open, another browser, for example. I think what I found that works quite nicely is that we can introduce activities that keep students engaged or ask questions. So one thing I do is ask a question in the chat box just randomly throughout the lesson. I'll just ask a question in the chat box. The last student to answer it, or the last student to answer that question is the one who wasn't paying attention or something like that. Just to keep asking questions, keep it fresh. Also, as well, using activities that encourage engagement through the chat box. That hopefully the ones that we've seen today are some good examples of that. So just kind of keep thinking about those, interacting with your students as much as possible, just to keep that engagement up. And again, that probably comes through the flipped classroom approach I spoke about, if you choose that option, because I think it's, I think that is naturally in itself very, very engaging. Oh, Joe, you're on mute. Sorry.
A loud train went past. So thank you very much, Dan. I really enjoyed that. And I can see from the chat and from the questions that everybody else was very, very engaged. I'm really sorry we didn't have a chance to ask all your questions. But again, thank you very much.